If we could take a moment of reflection. Thank you. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest, general nature thereof? Any of the committee members? Don't believe so. I'm going to talk a little bit about public participation. Members of the public are encouraged to provide the committee with their comments and questions. Presentations must be pre-arranged with Kirsten Higginson, the project administrator, pump storage project, before the agenda is released. Members of the public who wish to make a deputation about a specific agenda item at the meeting must register in advance with Kirsten by 4 p.m. on the day prior to the meeting, which was August 7th. And her contact information is khigginson@meaford.ca or 519-538-1060 extension 1172. There's limitations to the presentations to 10 minutes, and deputations are limited to 5 minutes. I know there's been a little bit of confusion about that. So again, if you're hoping to present or prepare a deputation, it is the day before the meeting by 4 p.m. that you need to declare that so that we can schedule it. If there's correspondence, in order for the committee to get it as part of their agenda documents, it needs to be to the committee a week and a day before the meeting. So it's a little bit earlier if you're writing in and just asking questions. So I'd ask everyone to try to adhere to that the best they can. I don't believe we have any presentations or deputations today. All right, so we'll move on. Approval of the minutes. There's a recommendation that minutes of July 11th meeting of the Pump Storage Advisory Committee be approved as presented. Is there a motion for that? Yep, is anyone a mover? Howard, a seconder. Thank you, Adam. Yeah, any discussion about the minutes? I will say that last month's meeting was a thorough discussion of the issues that the committee was seeing and questions they had. A report out of that will come to the committee at the next agenda. We'll see that, so we'll see the body of what was created there. Okay, and I think the next item we have, oh, sorry, is all in favor of the approving of the minutes? All right, thank you. Thank you. No, it's good. So today we have TC Energy is going to present for us. I would remind the committee that we've invited them. They are here as our guest. I ask for your patience as this presentation is fairly high level, and it's intended to level set us with the public facing presentation of TCE's proposal. This isn't going to answer all of our questions, and so we should just go in with that expectation. We have a lot of detailed and specific information that the committee is looking for, and TCE today has asked, and we have agreed that our questions will be limited to the information they've provided with us today. So as you ask questions, if you could reference a slide number and a point, and again, that's just trying to keep the discussion in the area of what they've presented. It's unlikely, at least I think it's unlikely, that this is going to be the last presentation of TCE. They're obviously an important part of the project, and we're going to have more times in the future, I hope, to have presentations from them and ask questions of them. So again, just a reminder to have some patience. So with that, I'd like to ask if TCE is ready to give us their presentation.
So good afternoon, I guess good evening almost. My name is Clark Little. Some of you know me, if not personally by name. And I'm really pleased to be here today to be able to start to, like your words, Doug, to level set this project, start to give a baseline upon which more knowledge can be provided when it's necessary. It's been a long time coming, and really pleased that we got to this state, and pleased you invited us to come and give a presentation. So I'll just say that to begin with. Looking forward to your questions. If I wander off topic and start talking about something which is not on the slides, feel free to ask me a question about it. Okay, it doesn't have to be on the slide. If I get into another subject, and I want to do that, sometimes I do wander off the script, then I'd be happy to answer any questions on it. And I just will say, and I agree with you, Mr. Chairman, that there's no way we can cover everything in 30 minutes or 45 minutes. We've done over 200 coffee chats. Each one of those is an hour and a half long. And even in those sessions, we sometimes run out of time for questions and answers. And there'll be some things I can't answer. A, because I don't know the answer, and I'll tell you that. Or B, I know the answer, but it's not possible for me to share it with you. That's why we're going to limit this to what's kind of on the agenda, and we'll see how it goes. So, any questions? How do you want to do the questions? Do you want to do it as we're moving through the subjects, or do you want to do it at the end?
I think we should wait till the end so that you get through the presentation and we don't derail that. So let's, if you could, just hold to the end and then we'll ask questions.
And then, so I was given, my instructions for a 30-minute presentation. Is that correct? Okay. Need my glasses. So before we get into any details, I'd like to focus on two words that are in the front slide, on the first slide. The first one is the word Ontario, and down in the middle of that paragraph, you see the word province. This project is a project that supports Ontario's stated needs to decarbonize their grid by 2035. I'll be talking a little bit more in detail about that in a minute. And it affects everybody in Ontario. It's not just the Meaford and the regional environment, but everybody is going to benefit from this in some way when it's operating. And I just want, because we can get down into some very detailed stuff very quickly. Never forget that this is, and when I get into some of the economic development numbers here, I think just keep in mind that this is focused on Ontario, and Meaford, of course, is the epicenter of it. And I want to just set that perspective as we start. Next slide, number 2. I'll have to use numbers, Kirsten. So we talked, you've all seen this. There's one other part of this at the end. I'm also providing you with 3. You may have seen them if you look through the slides. 3 references, URLs you can use for more information on a couple of topics on your own time. One of the important parts of this agenda is the first 3 bullets, and that is to ensure that we all understand what electrical storage is. Pardon me, electrical grid storage is, and where it fits in the grid, and why it is different from those assets that actually produce power, like Bruce Power, hydro plants, and so on. There is a distinction between the two. And in conversations I have with the public and some of the comments I heard in the first PSAC meeting, I thought this would be a good place to start, is just describe to you where the storage concept fits into the big picture on the grid. So try and give you some clarity on that, because if we don't separate it from the other assets, then it becomes very difficult to clearly state information for you, explain things for you, because it does not generate power from raw materials. So we'll get into that right away. Kristen, can you go to slide 5? Max, just hold it there. Don't start it, please. So I want to differentiate between electrical storage at grid scale. There's a couple of words I'm going to use throughout the presentation that are important. The word grid is important. When I'm talking about the grid, I'm talking the entire electrical system in Ontario, not just southwestern Ontario. And when I use the word capacity, that's a code word in the business for assets that generate power from raw materials. So we have to differentiate between storage, grid scale storage, and capacity assets. Because we don't create power from raw materials. We store power, which is not being used, for use the following day. So it is think of a battery. It is a large battery. And it's necessary because there's surplus power generated at night. Let me just get onto one myth-busting topic here. There is always going to be surplus power at night because it's a function of how many fixed assets you have. So as Ontario grows its nuclear and grows its small modular reactors, grows its wind and grows its solar, and grows its natural gas, which they're doing, and hydro, as that supply curve goes up, the need for storage increases. So scenarios where we're all going to have electric cars and there'll be no surplus power, therefore this doesn't make any sense. Do not consider the long-term demand, the supply cycles that are coming, the increases of assets. And it's linked directly to those increases and the existing ones. And yes, there is a cost. You can't pump water, pick a number, 400 feet uphill without needing power to do it of some sort. And it's electricity in this case. And we're about 75% efficient. So we preserve 75% of the power, which is surplus at night, by storing it. Let me rephrase that. We store a portion of the power, which is surplus at night, for use the following day. And it works out to be about 1 million homes of power every 24 hours. When I say grid scale, I'm talking about those sorts of numbers. Okay, so I'm going to give you the primer on this. We borrowed this from the United States and rejigged it for ourselves. You can run that now if you would, Kirsten, please.
What is pumped storage hydropower? Water. It's the most important substance on Earth. Without it, we wouldn't survive. It also helped power Ontario's economic growth for more than a century. More than 60% of Canada's electricity comes from hydropower. Ontario is fortunate to have a diverse mix of clean generation, like nuclear, wind, and solar power. And as wind and solar power continue to grow, water can also play an important role in integrating more clean resources onto the power grid. One way is by storing energy through a technology known as pumped storage hydropower. Think of it as a big battery, flexible enough to respond to various power demands. When clean electricity like wind and nuclear generation is in excess, typically at night when demand is low, water is pumped up to the higher elevation reservoir. The energy is stored in the form of water, and when electricity is at peak demand during the day, it's released back to a lower reservoir, such as Georgian Bay, basically filling in the gaps during peak demand and generating the needed electricity. Pumped storage is the most dominant form of energy storage on the electric grid today, representing 95% of all energy storage internationally. There are over 100 pumped storage projects worldwide announced, planned, or under construction, representing future opportunities to keep electricity grids reliable and ready to add more clean electricity to the mix at low operating costs. To learn more about TC Energy's proposed pumped storage project in Meaford, Ontario, please visit us online.
Okay, thanks. This would be a good time for questions if anybody had any, but I guess you'll save them for afterwards. Slide three, please.
Pumped storage project in Meaford.
So what does that concept look like here in our project? We dragged that model in here earlier this afternoon just to demonstrate, give you a sense of the scale of it. I'm going to be speaking to that model as well as the slide, which is, as you can see, it's an image of it. The scale of that is the same in north, south, east, west, and up and down. So it represents accurately the topography of the land. It represents accurately the scale of the reservoir with respect to the military base. And we have the military base on there because people who've been up there, you understand, you can walk around or drive around that. You get a sense of how large that reservoir is going to be relative to that base. There's a cutaway on this that you can't see, which gives you the underground construction of it. You can see it on the slides. And all of this was done. This design came out of discussions following in 2020, in the spring and early summer of 2020, before your first vote on this project that summer in June. It was a complete redesign in response to public opinion from residents of the municipality and our partners in this project, the Saugeen-Ojibwa First Nation. It was primarily, I think it was entirely redesigned based upon environmental concerns in terms of the bay, not just the quality of the water, but the preservation of the fish, the wildlife in the water, the ecosystems, turbidity, the water quality. Turbidity is one of the issues. And we did not want to damage the ambiance, the optics of the Niagara Escarpment. So everything went underground. And it went underground at a fairly sizable cost, estimated cost. We figure that the engineers over time added $1 billion in capital cost to this project by building and designing a system which is designed to actually protect the waters and the fish and the flora and fauna of Georgian Bay. And it is the only one like it in the world. And that is the inlet-outlet devices which are offshore and are shown there in that little curve. And I'll talk to them in just a second. So at night, surplus power, lots of it. This takes a portion of it, pumps that water from the lake or from the Georgian Bay offshore into that reservoir. And then the next day, like immediately following it, the same 24-hour period, they release the water to help provide increased supply to the grid. I do want to just remind you again or say that don't forget that every cycle this runs, it puts 1 million homes of power back on the grid, which would otherwise not be available. What does that mean to us as consumers? It means that the power we all pay for and is being generated at nights in surplus, we actually get some value from it. It's not completely sold offshore or curtailed. I think in an electrical grid, I was thinking about this driving in. I look at it like a system of water pipes, if you like. To me, we all understand our domestic water. And you know that you can only put so much pressure on it, so much volume into it, or something's going to give. In an electrical grid, exactly the same concept, except it's much more serious when it gives. It can only take so much electricity. And some of these big producers, primarily nuclear, and then with the residuals from wind, you can't turn them off at night. You can't take a rheostat and go, well, we don't need it now, we'll just shut it down. Nuclear reactor runs at a constant power output, and the energy it uses is to cool the water around the reactor. They don't turn the reactors down and surplus power. They just keep pushing it on the grid. So if you get an evening where there's, if you get a situation where there's too much power on the grid, then they have to sell it if it's not being used. If the taps aren't on, they have to sell it. And some of the, I've seen days on, ISO has a real time, you can go and look at it in real time. I've seen days where we actually paid other companies to take the power. It's not a very efficient business model. So this system is designed to preserve 75% of not the entire problem, but it preserves 1,000 megawatts of power that we'll use the next day. And that number on there, 100, has gone up to about 150 since that was built. That was made, that little doodle. Pump storage is becoming popular around the world because people are realizing, countries are realizing they can't afford to be not using all the power they generate. Also adds another safety valve in our grid. We'll add it. How many were you around for the last power outage? Early 2000s. What was it? 2003? Close. The big blackout. You've heard of Ludington. Ludington was running at that point and was full of water. And Ludington, we had one of our team went down there to have a look. They talked to the manager of the site, and they told them that the day that power grid came offline, they got a call from the eastern US saying, "Do you have water in your reservoir?" And Ludington is twice the size of this. They said, "Yeah." It says, "Release it now, generate power." And they did. And by doing so, they got enough water into the grid, right? The electricity into the grid to stop the blackout from going right across the continent. So it provides a sort of a last minute, in case of fire, break glass if there's ever a blackout again in this part of the world. Next slide, please. A lot of people have asked us, well, why Meaford? There's a lot of good reasons for it. When the company initially surveyed all of Ontario for sites, there were 3 of them that percolated to the top. And Meaford was the one that was the best trade-off of all the factors that were considered. Some of the advantages of why Meaford is a good place to do this are listed there. It's got the height. It's close to the GTA, which is the big user of power in southwestern Ontario for industry, and it's on federal land. Now that can be a good thing or a bad thing depending on where you are in the discussion. But from our perspective, it's a good thing because the military has told us that the land that this is sited on is not used for their main training role and is available to be used for this project once the regulators have a look at it and decide it's doable. That's a defense statement that came out 2 summers ago, I think, right? 2 years ago? 2 years ago, maybe this month or last month. So they've agreed to provide us access to the part of the range that we're going to work on for the purpose of gathering data, core samples, geology samples, and for starting to populate and inform our own decision process on the way forward with respect to construction. I don't think there's any way that this project can be built any other place in Ontario, not this day and age. Ontario Hydro took a crack at doing it in the early 70s at Georgian Peaks, and they decided at that point, and they looked here also in the early 70s, and because D&D was making noises about shutting the range down, and they said, "Oh, you're going to shut it down. We want to use it for pumped hydro storage." This was in the early 70s, 70 years ago, and if I'm close, I'm not close. 50 years ago, and the military got reinterested in it and decided they weren't going to shut it down. And then they went to Georgian Peaks and had a look at what was there in terms of elevation and offset from the water. And it was geographically perfect, but from a social economic perspective, totally undoable because it's on private land. And it would have required clearing off the top of that escarpment. And that just wasn't possible in the 70s. Next slide, Steve, please. Not the next one, number six, sorry. Yeah, that's it. So in January, the former Minister of Energy issued a letter to all of the proponents and the rest of the government saying he wanted more information on the beyond just ISO's considerations for the dollar value of this. Meaning, is it possible to use this technology at the capital cost it is? We got into a bit of a debate with ISO. We believe it is. They believe it isn't. So the Minister of Energy said, okay, well, tell us what other elements of this are valuable to the province of Ontario. This was our first top line message. It seems to be taking root because in this year's annual planning outlook, ISO's, and I don't have a slide that shows this. There's a statement in there. It's called the Annual Planning Outlook 2024. And it's very current. It's about a month old. And there's a statement in there that says they are directing ISO to identify transmission alternatives, that's power lines, necessary to allow for the development of new nuclear, including small modular reactors, and the proposed Bruce C nuclear complex, long duration storage, and hydroelectric resources. ISO classifies this project as a long duration storage project. We'll produce power for, depending on what the final design looks like, we'll produce power for 8 to 10 and a half, 11 hours. It's all design dependent. And ISO's demarcation line for long duration as opposed to short duration, which is batteries, is 8 hours of continuous input onto the grid. And we meet that definition. So ISO is thinking about how to hook up these different assets, including long duration storage, in a new grid that would service the new assets when they come online. And that reference, I don't have it in the notes that follows, but if you do look for the 2024 annual planning outlook at ISO on their website, go to page 53, you'll see that statement on there. That tells us that the Ontario government is going in the right direction. They want to do this. And right now, we are in negotiations with elements of the Ontario government to come up with a commercial structure for this. What's it going to look like commercially? And people have asked me even today, when are we going to get an answer? And I can't give you an answer. I don't know. I don't have access to that information. And I just know when it happens, and it's going to be sooner than later. What does that mean? We're anticipating some sort of a decision from them in the next couple of months, certainly before the end of the year. An agreement between the province and ourselves on a commercial structure. How are we doing for time? Anybody watching? Left? Next slide, please. You heard us talking about this. This is an essential element of the project for us. The first people who were briefed on this project and asked, what do you think, were the SON. And they were before the municipality, before the Ontario government, before the labor unions, before any other stakeholder interest group. John Mickelson, who, if you don't know, you'll get to know him over time, went to SON and said exactly that. This is what we're thinking of doing. This is where we're thinking of doing it. What do you think? And that simple act of including them at the start, as opposed to including them near the end, saying, how do we get their support? Let's give them some money for A, B, C, and D. Made all the difference in the world and was groundbreaking in Ontario at the time. I've heard Chief Najuan speak on this, and I'm not going to even try to impart the emotion that he has when he talks about it. I would encourage you to invite him to one of these meetings and have him come and talk to you about his perspective on why this project means so much for the Saugeen Ojibwa Nation. Importantly, SON is not just interested in, or not interested, is part of the business side of it, an equity arrangement where they become a partner in a spin-off company. They operate, maintain it, and help build it. They're also a key member of the environmental team. And that last sentence there in bold print, the company has made a commitment in writing and in the public that if SON does not want the project to advance for whatever reason, but primarily environmental, because that's where their interests are, keepers of the water, keepers of the land, watchers over the flora and fauna, if they can't come to terms with what we're doing, then the project stops. So from our perspective, they have the right of first refusal. And as traditional keepers of the land and water, that's a role that they should play in this. They are not with it. We have an initial agreement with them to move toward a formal partnership, but the partnership is not yet formally defined. It's coming. Next slide, please. Number 8. I noticed during the last PSAC that we were talking about 17,000 workers, and I got the sense from this, the discussion, the questions, and the comments that you thought 17,000 workers coming to Meaford. I want to just make sure that these numbers that you're looking at in the study, which is available, I have a link if you haven't seen it, at the back of the presentation. These numbers are I mean, how do you process this? This is for the province of Ontario, the entire province. The company that did this is well known and respected in their line of work, and I've looked into the modeling of it, and I don't understand it, how they got to these numbers, but this is what they got to, and I think they're very indicative of what's possible in Ontario. The next slide is an important slide. 9. So you can see the map. The darker the color, the more the increase in the gross domestic product in each of those counties. And that tells a picture, an important picture, that the majority of the economic benefits as they start to flow through are going to come into Grey County. That's the dark color. And Meaford's included in Grey County, as is Owen Sound and TBM and a bunch of others. As you get further away, counties will have less opportunity to reap some of the benefits, economic flow down benefits from the project. So this number here, 3,400 full-time employment equivalents over 1 year. That includes, economic modeling is a little bit like witchcraft. That includes employees in TransCanada. It includes all of the employees from the engineering teams that are going to build this thing. The money they spend locally for hiring people and for services. The growth of businesses in the community that respond to that call for services and people as they expand or they start to germinate locally in the region to support the project during construction and afterwards. So all of the things that they buy, the money they give their employees is new. And then the families cascade down and spend money out in the economy. And also the workforce goes out in the economy and boosts up, a long list of restaurants and grocery stores and retail sales outlets. And it just keeps cascading down and more value and value. And that's what these numbers represent. So it's not 3,400 jobs working up at the site. There's 3,400 jobs that come from the Gray County portion of that map at all levels of economic benefit. 4 minutes left. Let's go to,
Don't rush. Carry on.
let's go to slide 10. I've already talked about this. This is the cutaway. I think the next part is important. The next slide, number 11, please. There's 21 of these things, 20, 22, whatever the numbers are going to be. And these are the inlet outlet ports for the water. So when we're pumping water uphill, this array of these screens, the water flows through them and gets pumped up, and it comes in horizontally. They are located midway between the bottom and the surface. So if the surface is if the bottom is 80 feet below the surface, this will sit in the middle, one of these will sit in the middle third of that water column. And there's 20 of them because the secret to this, the design concept to this, is that the thing that saves the fish and preserves the environment, the flora and fauna, is that the anticipated velocity of the water being taken into these and being released is about the same as a natural current. When I first heard that, I'm an engineer, a civil engineer. Never practiced it, but I studied it. And I thought to myself, how the hell do they do that? And so I grabbed one of the engineers and I said to them, you got to explain this to me, because without an explanation, it doesn't make any sense. Because the water coming downhill from the reservoir into the powerhouse is kind of like a mini Niagara Falls. It's cascading and moving really fast. You couldn't get the turbines to turn on and get the power without it moving at that velocity. Yet, 1.5 kilometers, 2 kilometers away from the pump house, you claim there's a velocity equal, about the same as the current. And I was in a coffee chat early on. I want some of you may have been in this coffee chat. We did them in the first ones we did in the curling club. And somebody said, oh yeah, I get that. It's like a soaker hose. And I asked him if I could use that. And he said, sure, it's great. And I thought about it. You remember the plastic green vinyl hoses? I remember them as a kid. You attach them to the house and you roll them out, turn the tap on full, and the water would trickle out of it. It's because there's 200 holes in that hose. The same concept. This is the same concept on steroids. That's why there's 20 of these inlet outlet devices. And that's how, and you notice they're capped at the top and at the bottom. So from a turbidity factor, we've done studies on this, that the outgoing flow at the current is not going to stir up the bottom. And the fish that are around it are not going to get drawn into it because the mesh is very small. I should have brought a piece of it. It's about like this. And therefore, bigger fish, like in a situation at Ludington, cannot happen because the holes aren't big enough for the fish to get through. That's about it. Slow velocity, small screens, saves fish, prevents turbidity. I will say briefly about the environmental assessment. It's the next big milestone that's coming up. I've given you two websites to go to learn more about it from the agencies themselves. The Federal Impact Assessment Agency is the one that's going to drive this. The proponent does not drive the environmental assessment process. We are reactive to what the environmental process assessment organization says to us and asks us. We don't have any, it's not our process. It's mandated by the federal government, and they're the ones that are responsible for it, for executing it, and ensuring that there's sufficient and there's robust community engagement. And that will start, we think it'll start, could start by the end of this year, might be early next year to get it started. And at that point, every one of the concerns being brought by anybody, anywhere, have to be replied to by the Environmental Assessment Agency using third-party scientific organizations and information, analyzing the information to answer the questions. So, I mean, as much as I'd like to debate in an open forum with Save Georgian Bay about some of their messaging, I don't need to, because the environmental assessment is going to go through every one of those issues and they will decide what's valid, what isn't, what's, whether what's important and so on. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. I know the environmental assessment team has briefed the staff here 9 months, 10 months ago, roughly. We weren't involved in that. They came down and spent about an hour, I think, and just gave it to the counselors or to the staff, and just said, this is how it works. Here's who we are. Stand by for further. And if you've got questions about the process, I would urge you to contact them directly. For us, the sustainability protection, long-term health of Georgian Bay is a threshold issue. And we're not going to be allowed to build anything unless environmental regulators decide that our efforts protect, sustain, and the long-term health of Georgian Bay. Community Indigenous engagement, we're engaged in it more so a while ago than we are now, because we're standing back and letting this committee get its feet on the ground. And the role of this committee is to reach out to the community, and hopefully you will continue to ask us for our perspective on certain issues as they come up. Coffee chats are next slide, number 14, are always available. We're kind of winding down for the rest of August, but we'll crank them up again in September. Happy to see any of you for an 1.5 hour session one-on-one to talk about any issue you've got. I'm going to draw your eyes to the 23-24, the first line of this. And that's what we're in the middle of right now, is defining the commercial pathway for the project with the Ontario government. And I don't have any information I can share with you about it. Once that happens, we get into the environmental assessments. There's a federal one I've talked about. There's a provincial one. The SON one is going to happen anyway. And I believe D&D will have their own input into the federal, as owners of the land, they will have their own input into the federal environmental assessment process. And we hope to have that all done by 2027, which looks maybe a long way away, but it really isn't when you think how fast time is flying. And then construction and then operation by 2032. And that 2032 date is very important because it's about 2032, 33, 34 that the province needs this project online and working. They could use it today, but they will not be able to argue that they don't need the power in mid-30s. Next slide, number 16. There's your references. Sorry, you can get them. I guess you've been given this presentation, that one. Sorry, was it 16, 17? And those are important references for you if you want more information. I'd ask you to read, those of you who are economically developed in the economic development business, it's part of your portfolio. I'd urge you to have a look at that. Because it's not a guarantee any of this is going to happen anywhere. Project can go, but if it's going to require the municipalities and the regions to get together and pool the resources, come up with innovative solutions to problems which no single municipality can solve, housing being one of them. So we have a fun time in the future, hopefully working together in a collaborative, looking forward. What can we do to work together to solve some of the challenges that are coming? That's it. I'll just remind you once more that, if I may, that it's not all the parts, there's a lot of moving parts, they're all attached, and the moving parts extend from the federal government to the provincial government right down into this committee and further into the residents of the community. There you go. That's it.
Thank you, Clark.
Ready for questions.
All right. All right. So committee's heard the presentation, rather than have a free-for-all of a barrage of questions, what I'd hope to do is I'll sort of work my way around and everyone get a chance to ask questions as they see fit. We've got an hour and 15 minutes left. Clark may not make it that long, so we'll. But again, if you could, when asking your questions, try to direct them to something specific in the presentation. And if you be thoughtful of time in asking your questions, please. Yeah, Bob.
So this project is 1,000 megawatts. Can you give me a sense of what percent of the whole grid this is covering? And I say that it's a difficult question to ask. I'm not sure I'm asking it perfectly clearly, so I'll try it a different way. There's a solid part of the grid from nuclear and hydro that probably doesn't need to be covered by a battery. But there's variable with wind and solar. So when you put 1,000 megawatts of capacity into storage, are we covering 10% of the whole grid or 1% of the whole grid? Do you have any sense of that?
The grid doesn't work like that, Bob.
Okay.
It's
Why
not,
we're
it's
here.
not segmented like that. You can't capture a bundle of electricity, electrons, and say, oh, these came from Bruce Power. Let's send them there. That's not possible. It's like water in your pipes. You don't know where the hell, well, in the house, it comes from one intake, but I mean, you can't, it's not, systems aren't smart enough to be able to do that. So when the power is put on the grid, it goes wherever it's needed. Right? And you can think of situations like last week where we had those high temperatures in the GTA. You can be absolutely assured that they had a deficit of power in places last week, and they had to buy power or turn up the gas plants in order to make up the lack of supply. So it travels at the speed of light. So it's, when it goes on the grid, it goes where it's needed. If it's not needed, then they have to sell it or ground it. They don't do a lot of that, but they sell it. So if the question is, does 1,000 megawatts solve the problem we have today? The answer to that is no. It doesn't come close to solving the problem today. But nonetheless, it is 1 million homes of power that it does save every day, protect, and put back on the grid the next day. And I haven't said it yet, but in a stable grid, that means there's 1,000 megawatts of power that the gas plants do not have to provide. You can turn a gas plant down with a rheostat. So ISO has to juggle that, all of those variables to ensure that this 1 million homes of power is not wasted at times when we need the power. Does that help?
I'm trying to build my understanding of this, and I'm conscious in our discussions that we're asking questions on behalf of the public. So as I'm wrestling with, I'm sure people in the audience and people online are wrestling with the same thing. You know, the need of this, you know, if we had 5 of these, if we had 2 of these, what's, you know, the right number? How bad is the need? And just trying to understand exactly, you know, can we project the right number? If we're going to have 60% more need and we already are behind the 8 ball, well, you know, that tells me there's an urgency to it. But at the same time, trying to understand, you know, what's your balance and, you know, between storage and new capacity, turning up, you know, the temperature on the nuclear reactor to produce the power versus using the stuff that might have been grounded last night or sold off at a loss. And just one follow-up, which is, do we ever sell it off at a profit?
No. No, you have to be careful now. I'm not an economist. I can barely manage my own household accounts. The word profit means that we have money over which it costs to produce the power. And I'm just going to say, not often. Here's one scenario you'll love. Ludington is a pump storage project that has twice the capacity as we have, 2,000 megawatts. It's just across, you know, it's just in electrical terms, it's just across the street in Michigan. They buy surplus power from us at night to help fill their reservoir. Why? Because they get it for cents on the dollar. And then the next day, they distribute that power to the Michigan residents. So the conclusion of that is, with the current system, we're helping subsidize the electrical bills of residents in Michigan. That's not because anybody's doing this deliberately, it's just the way the grid works. And we do the same thing when we need power, we'll pull it off the cheapest source anywhere. Quebec Hydro now is complaining about the fact they don't have as much power as they thought they were going to have. Excuse me. So they are, you know, they're no longer saying, we'll always have power for you. You don't need pump storage. Now they've reassessed their own needs and they're saying, you may not have the power we think we need. So they're going through a bit of a reassessment.
Right. Thank you for now.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. No, come on. This is our communications director.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Beasley. Just to provide a bit more context. So the ISO's annual planning outlook that they released a few months ago, in that they suggest that 8,000 megawatts of incremental capacity demand will be required before 2035. So if you think of our project, that's 1,000 megawatts, but they're saying 8,000 is needed. So our project is a 1/8 of that need before 2035.
Just to follow up, ISO is also commissioned or is in the process of commissioning 4,500 megawatts of battery storage with that short-term duration. And it's going to make a dent in it, but not a big dent. But right now, any storage is better than no storage. And this will be measurably felt by the power people when it's up and running. And there is an urgency. One other thing you said about, should have written it down, about nuclear, we're tied to nuclear. As they increase their capacity, you need more storage, period. You'll never get enough wind power in this province that will meet the nuclear supply. It helps, but it's limited in scale. So, and Bruce Power will tell you that. If you're at a session with Bruce Power, there's one coming up in Toronto in a couple of weeks with the future of nuclear in Ontario. They'll be mentioning that this is an important element of their, they need it to expand.
Thank you. Bob? If you could, your microphone.
Got it?
Yeah, fine. So I'm going to refer to, none of these slides are numbered, so this one. All right, Clark. The one with the one that's showing the interacting with Georgian Bay best in class design.
Yep.
That'll be the one I'll be leaving my question.
Yep.
Okay. So it's about slide 6, lower inlet and outflow. What I would like is, what the committee would like is not just what I would like, but I'm part of the committee report showing the effect on the turbidity and the water quality of Georgian Bay during construction of the lower inlet and the outflow. Also, the report showing the effect of the turbidity and water quality of Georgian Bay during the operation of the pump storage project from these particular inflow and outflow structures. Also, I would like reports showing the effects on the drinking water for all the residents and the municipalities who draw water from Georgian Bay. And your plan, or TCE's plan, to establish the baseline for this water quality, and then ongoing monitoring during both construction and operation of the project to assure that these things are safe. Also referring to the construction, which slide would this be now? Hold on, because they're not numbered, but in fact, you did mention that the design of this in your talk just now. you did mention that reports were made on this particular thing that showed that you wouldn't cause any turbidity. So if those reports exist, the committee would like to see those because it's a big concern of the residents, especially because all of the residents along the shoreline, including the town of Meaford, municipality of Meaford, draw their water from there. Plus, just referring to the construction of the reservoir, which you showed on one of the first slides, would that be that big one right there? I'm not sure what slide that one is. During that construction, the construction of these tunnels, all of this construction will be disturbing considerable of the base below it. So the same testing procedures should be set up for on-land wells anywhere within the vicinity, which would be on the same aquifer as the base, because without these things set up, and if there's effects on the wells or if they happen to be polluted or undrinkable, there has to be a structure in place so that, you know, the residents are not the ones who are suffering this. And also when this happens, some kind of a procedure put in place about how it's corrected and who pays. That's the other critical thing. Who pays for these things? So these are real things that will happen in our community. I don't know with this construction, there's no mention of any kind of traffic or anything of that, or dust or any of these things, but there must be, you must have done studies on these things. They would also be things that would be important for the community to know, because either ways we're going to interact with your project is, you know, we can't control it on a high level, but the interaction will be in how your project impacts the life and the drinking water and also our lifestyles through vibration, through dust and traffic. So are those studies available? And if they are, will you share them with the committee? Thank you.
So let's start with the water, both the shore water as well as the groundwater. We have already done analysis of the shore waters. We'll be doing those aquatic analysis out there off where that ring is for the last 3 seasons, 3 years, pardon me. And we have data. I don't have any idea what the data says. It's not available yet.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
Pardon?
I didn't understand that it's not available.
It's not available publicly, not yet, no.
So you will not share that, TC will not share that with the committee?
Of course we'll share it when we have it. We don't have it yet. We don't have the analysis yet.
Okay, so, all right, so the data is done, but there's no analysis of yet. Data
has been collected and partial analysis has been completed,
Okay.
and it's not, that information will be released when we get the go-ahead for the project from Ontario, and the environmental assessment people start to give it to them so that they can have it, so they can start to provide a guidance and assessment of what's going on.
So for a timeline then for the committee who's been set up primarily to look ahead so that we're not reacting in the sense of reacting, we're being proactive. In other words, if there's going to be possibility of a new water supply necessary for all the people that draw water from the bay or the town, that we're proactive, because you can't instantly change that. And you're saying, well, the information's out there, just stop and correlate it, and you'll get it once the project's approved and once we start our studies. But by then, will we have time to react? And how are we going to do our functioning job if those studies are not released to us as soon as possible?
Yeah, and there's just to tamper some of the enthusiasm, there are very few completed studies.
You're not going to tamper my enthusiasm. I'm just asking a simple question. I'd like an answer. That's
I'm
all.
saying,
All right? If it's available, great. And if it's not, it's not.
I get so it's not available. They're not ready yet. And that's simply a business decision. We don't have clarity from the Ontario government. You don't do these sorts of studies on a cheaply, inexpensively. There's millions and millions and millions of dollars involved in producing them. We're not going to start until we get certainty from the government that this project's a go. That's where we are. So it's a waiting game. The second we get the green light from or clarity from the Ontario government, then we're going to pull in the environmental assessment team and start to line up which reports get done first, what has to happen, who's going to do them, and what data is going to inform them. that information is coming, will come. So it's,
Is there any traffic studies done by any chance or haulage routes done? Is any of that done that could be shared with the committee so we could look at that aspect?
so us doing a traffic study without the input from the municipality is not efficient. One of the deliverables for the environmental assessment will be a traffic study. That's by regulation. And we're gonna have to sit down with your troops and go over what we think we need and come to some arrangement on how it's possible to do that. So,
And again, that can't be done until the environmental assessment starts. The municipality would not be available for that.
we need to get certainty from the Ontario government before I can even attempt to answer
Okay,
that.
thank you.
But that's one place where there's a need for collaboration. Because what we would like to try to avoid is, here's our thinking about the traffic study, and it goes to the staff and they say, well, no, that can't work. How about this? And we get into this sort of ping pong thing going for several years, trying to sort out the traffic. The traffic situation is not complicated in this particular location.
Well, I understand, Clerk, it's not complicated, but to the committee it's complicated because how are we going to do our job if we don't have the information? If it's a simple traffic study, I'm just saying, like, where is it? Can we look at it? And you're saying you can't
We don't have
provide
it yet
Okay.
because they're looking at options beyond road traffic. Our desire is to completely minimize the impact of road traffic, construction traffic on this municipality. That includes options of potential marine transportation of bulk goods, which would take a lot of trucks off the road. So you got to give us the time to figure this stuff out and then get this stuff organized and get it out into the public as options.
I think this has been 4 years now, I think, hasn't it? Of studies.
Your point is what?
It's 4 years of studies. That is fair much.
We've been collecting data.
Okay.
If I could,
Yes,
I'll
I'm
let
sorry.
some others ask some questions. Adam, do you have something?
Yeah, I have two fairly simple questions.
Sure, Adam.
If you cut a tree down in Grey Bruce, are you willing to plant it back in Grey Bruce? And I definitely appreciated the up-to-date worker numbers, things like that. But is TCE also willing to help encourage local heavy machine operators that don't work for you? If I want to build a house in the next 10 years, is there going to be somebody that's going to dig me a hole? Or does every heavy equipment operator want to work and only work for TCE?
We talked to a couple of the building unions about this a year ago. Because we wanted their analysis, their ideas, because these unions are ubiquitous in Ontario, right across the country. They've built big projects before. We asked them to give us a rough order of magnitude. What do they think about the labor force? And we were particularly interested in how many beds we need locally to provide accommodation and for workers that are not in a position to transit every day. And they came up with a number. I don't know whether Herb shared that with you or not, but it was a lot less than 1,700. It was a lot less than 1,000. So for right now, we don't know what the workforce looks like. We won't know until we get the engineers hired to build it. And that's not going to happen until midway through next year, earliest. Once they get on board, one of the things they're going to be asked to do is tell us what the workforce looks like. And then we'll have numbers, like precise numbers. Now we have rough order of magnitude stuff. And the number of beds roughly that has been suggested by LiUNA is about 300 for permanent residents. That's not in Meaford. That's 300 where the municipalities and the second tier governments can get involved and help come up with solutions where they get a portion of those 300 beds. That's a topic for a huge workshop coming that we need to do once we get more information. Didn't mention housing during the briefing, but housing would take up another 45 minutes here. And it's a little premature. I mean, I know you want the information, how's it going to affect the municipality? It's up to the municipalities. The municipalities can come up with we can work together and come up with a plan to build something for some workers. Maybe if we got 300, we've got 75 coming to 4 different locations. And it's built in such a way that the stuff is modular and can be either moved and put somewhere else afterwards for affordable housing, or it can be remain in situ and be turned over to ownership to somebody for affordable housing. That's clearly a win-win situation. But that's something that's going to have to come from the second tier, first tier governments. Say, look, we got an idea here. We got some people together. The first meeting about that occurred 6 weeks ago in Owen Sound. And Kirsten was at the meeting where the challenge was put out to major developers in the area about workforce. And everybody's pretty excited, and they went away to see if they can come up with some good collaborative ideas. So it's more than I wanted to say about housing, but that's where we are.
Dave, do you have a question? Oh, sorry.
Trees?
Trees, yeah.
Like just environment in general. I know when you have an environmental impact, you're mandated to remediate, repair, whatever you'd like to call it. I was told at my coffee chat that it was kind of, you take something down, it's within that item's natural habitat. That might be the entire North America. I'd rather see TCE have a commitment that at least it is returned as locally as possible.
So, right. And there's a formula for this. Okay, the tree biologists have a formula, and it's kind of like 3 to 1. Could be higher, could be lower, I don't know, but it's a ratio. And we all know that if you cut down an old growth tree, you're not going to get the carbon exchange benefits from it by planting 1 tree that's only this high, or even maybe 3 trees this high. There may be some other formula for particular trees and size, and what we want to do is replace, put enough trees in to offset the loss of carbon processing that the trees that we cut down would have done. And that's the commitment the company's making.
Carbon processing, but there's still habitat and things like that is more affected by our local environment. So
yeah, they'll go locally if we can find room for them. Yeah, for sure. And we already have planted 700 Tree Canada. The last 3-4 years, we planted 700 trees in this county. Actually put some in Blue Mountain. That got away from us before we could stop it and get it into Meaford. But we planted about 700 trees already in anticipation of being able to say, and when we start cutting them down the range, now we've got, which is 3 years away, now we've got trees that are 5 years older than they were when they were planted, and that changes the whole formula. So we're looking forward, looking ahead, and the corporation has helped us plant some of those trees already. Bob, you had a question about water. I want to come back to the water question. We are acutely aware of the need for a baseline, especially in groundwater. And we've been talking informally with the municipality for some time about actually doing groundwater studies. We have to do them anyway for where the reservoir is going, but we want to extend them to include the residents who are potentially in a situation where there might be some risk of the groundwater, God forbid, changing the flow. So those studies have not started yet, but they're high on the list of things that get started in advance of the environmental assessment. Also, shore wells, we had an internal discussion about that. Is there anything there that we need to be looking at? Bottom line is, I'd like everybody to have a water test on a baseline for every resident. I don't know what the distance is away from the center of that reservoir, certainly down to the shoreline on each side. And we understand what the baseline is. And I've been told we're committed, if there's a problem, we're committed to fixing it. That answers one of your questions.
So, Dave?
But we don't, again, we haven't gone out, actually we've done a couple for different reasons. But the full program isn't designed yet. Everybody's aware it's coming, and we just have to get into that as we get started with the environmental assessment. there's time to get these baseline measurements.
Clark, from our last meeting, we had quite a bit of frustration because we don't really know what people are thinking, and I think that's showing in Bob's questions too. Is there a person that from TC that could come and say, in a perfect world, which we all know there isn't, this is what we would like to do, this is how we'd like to handle the transportation, you know, because we're spinning our wheels. We all know that what we'd like to do maybe, or what you would like to do may not be what actually happens. But as of today, this is how we would like to address it. Like, you know, there was questions, is the reservoir above ground, below ground? You know, are we using trucks? Are we using, is there someone that has that information that would help us have some guidance?
Yeah, yes, it's not gonna be much different than what I'm saying to you, but there certainly is. The design is not finalized yet. So the height of the reservoir could vary, the depth could vary. Not significantly, but all these fine-tuned dimensions make a difference to the output. And at some point, we'll get design information it's going to take a couple of years to get that design information. We don't have that detail yet. So transportation, let's come back to that. I mean, my first question would be, what do you guys want? I know you're going to say we don't want any trucks. Well, let's say in your perfect world, what would a solution look like? And that's the starting point. We can sit down and hear what your concerns are. We've got them very well figured out, but this is the way to do it, is to have a group to do this, maybe not this particular forum, but members of this sit down with our people and they say, right, what do we need to do here? This is what we need to build it. Now, how do we make this as painless as possible for the municipality?
Like the comment about marine transportation, you know, and I've heard this discussion before, that piques my interest because that certainly takes a lot of load.
Huge amount.
Yeah.
And I know that it's being discussed internally. And when you see the initial project description document, which is a document that goes public when the environmental assessment starts, all of the options we're talking about have to be in there. They don't have to have solutions, but they need to be identified so that there can be comments from the public on each one of those options. And then we take those comments and take the engineers and sit down and see what's feasible, what can really be done here.
Sorry, Clark, could you repeat that for me? When would that be available? That's when
The IPD will come out when we formally start the impact assessment process.
Okay,
It's a big document. Part of that is already written, and it's just sitting waiting for Ontario to come around. But essentially, it will lay out. In this case, it's an easy one to talk about. It'll lay out options for construction traffic, A, B, C, and D. And some of those, and everything we've even thought about, even wild stuff, will be in there so that it will be commented on by the public to the regulators so they can determine what really needs to be sorted out. So in that way, the regulators keep us honest and ensure that the concerns you have are being addressed. But those are some of the thoughts that we talk about in coffee chats. So, I mean, I wish I had more. I wish I had details. I don't. And we're not going to have real details until we get in toward the environmental assessment process. Doesn't mean we can't start planning for groundwater studies. We can do that internally. And we can work with the municipality to decide how they want to do it because it's their residents. And that would be a separate discussion, say, how do you want to handle this? We can get that started before the environmental assessment. There's a lot of stuff like that.
Howard?
Clark, you talked a little bit about the nature of short-term storage, as in batteries. For the benefit of the committee and the public, could you just elaborate a little bit more as to why batteries are economically, environmentally not scalable to the size of this project?
So if we wanted to put batteries to replace this reservoir with batteries, we need 3 times the ground to do it, 3 times the surface area to do it for 1,000 megawatts. Batteries have a place for sure. They can be put up and used and commissioned quickly relative to something like this. And in ISO's and in the minister's eyes, they need some sort of storage now. So they're putting 4,500 megawatts of battery power, battery storage in, right? They can only produce power for 4 hours. I'd like to hear what a battery guy has to say about that, but that's our belief. And then they have to be recharged. And there's some problems with that. If you're taking surplus off the grid and you have to recharge, you have to put the power, you have to get the power out of the batteries onto the grid, and you don't want to do that in quiet times because it'll have to be restored somewhere else. So there's a tricky sequencing of these things. I think there's more important fundamental issues with batteries. They're a short-term fix for a problem which needs to be addressed. Supply chain is strategically, a supply chain back to batteries is risky. I read in an article recently, I think in one of the major outlets, Global Mail or Star, that the Chinese have decided that they're not going to export certain batteries to the United States. It's getting wrapped up in US trade policy. And that spells trouble for battery storage people because they have to replace these batteries. Where the hell are they going to get them from? There's all kinds of strategic issues about it. Relying on a foreign nation for something as essential as that is something that politicians and strategists have to decide whether it's worth the risk. Environmentally, they're dirty. There's no way you can put a field of batteries in and replace them every 15 years with the current technology without a huge carbon footprint. And people will say, well, the technology will change. Okay, but you still got, let's say it changes in 10 years and somebody comes up with the trillion-dollar solution for battery storage, some sort of science fiction thing, and they make it work. Then all the stuff that you've got, which is battery storage, either has to be disposed of or decommissioned. And there's nobody in North America that I'm aware of today, maybe you guys can help me because I know you research these things, who is decommissioning electrical storage batteries. What are they going to do with them? They have to put them somewhere. And right now it's not economical to recycle them to get the precious metals out of them. It's cheaper to go to China or go to Uganda, go to one of these faraway places, mine the stuff, ship it over, process it, build the batteries, than it is to recycle the stuff they're building. Fundamentally a challenge with that. So batteries have a place. At this level, at 1,000 megawatts, it's in one facility. Fire, do you know how lithium burns? Have you researched that? If you forget it, you put a third of it, you put 300 and whatever it is, 33 megawatts of battery power where that reservoir is, and it lights on fire. You've got a catastrophic environmental problem downhill from that site. Something to think about.
Lindy, you got?
I have 2 questions. They're sort of circling back a little bit, so I apologize. But my first one is simple. I don't know if you know exactly if you have the final plans drawn up, but I wonder, the water in the reservoir, will it be mixing with the soil? Because currently that soil has been reported to be contaminated. And I just wonder, is there going to be some kind of lining to protect it, or will it be previously tested to make sure it actually is safe? Because of course you're digging deep enough that it maybe isn't an issue.
Good questions and topical for today because of this concern about drinking water. The reservoir is going to be lined. So I can't tell you what it's going to be lined with, but there's a number of options. And the reason that it's going to be lined is to seal it away from the rock underneath. So water cannot travel downward through the rock and then sideways out toward the escarpment and then undermine the stability of that rock. So it's going to be lined. We'll know more about that when they publish the paper about options for lining the reservoir.
Well, that's exactly what I wanted to hear, so thank you. And then my second question was, I know you discussed jobs, opportunities, and like the amount of, you worded it as beds required for the construction and overall full-time jobs. What about the jobs of people that have to be living in Meaford,
Right.
kind of those higher paid jobs that people kind of see as the big plus to this? About how many of those are there going to be?
Right. So a number is, well, more than 300. You know, it's whatever the balance is.
Well, I mean, like working the plant, living here in Meaford.
Oh,
running the
full-time?
plant. Yeah, full-time, like more like beyond construction, beyond the first couple years of operation.
So from TransCanada Energy itself, we're picking a number conservatively 40 people full-time on TransCanada.
Yep. And
But let me just add a postscript to that. They're going to be operating the plant.
yes,
There's going to be a maintenance plan for this plant. In many different areas have to be maintained. By regulation, they have to have a system that can be observable by third-party regulators on the reservoir to make sure that there's no problems with it once it's built. They do that while they build it, but after it's built. Somebody's going to have to do that work. And, you know, zebra mussels and 21 of those things. There's something there that hasn't been addressed yet. And somehow they're going to have to figure out how to maintain this apart from the big machinery in the powerhouse. That's going to require a deliberate maintenance program and people to do it. I don't think they're going to be TransCanada people. So there's opportunities there for industry or for businesses to start thinking about, you know, how do they present something to TransCanada that would suggest that they could help maintain this. And that's where you get your permanent spin-off businesses somewhere in the region.
and then with that, I'm assuming, so that's at least 40 people that will be potentially moving here, which is great because those are highly educated jobs, I'm assuming, like higher salary. Has there been any thought into money or investment into some of the resources here in Meaford, such as the big one I'm thinking of as the youth representative is the school, which I know these people might not be coming with families, but if they are, currently the school does not have space. In fact, it's already overflowing. So has there been any thought? I know this might not be TC's responsibility, but going into how we can potentially accommodate 40 additional families or more, because that's quite a bit of kids and it's not like we have any extra room currently.
Right. So the impact of the permanent employees plus an assessment of the impact of the indirect or the induced employees, people that are companies that start to set up business here to support us. And then the other retail outlets that then support them is the starting point for that. And we're going to have to be able to analyze that in the social economic section of the initial product description, our initial project description. We haven't looked at it seriously in depth. So we have to get engaged on that for sure. And it's one of the mandatories in the impact assessment agency's list of areas to study. What's the socioeconomic impact of the people who are working on this project and the construction people that are coming to build it? And what do we do to mitigate any problems?
Okay, thank you.
It's coming.
Thank you.
Martin?
Yeah, I'm looking at this lovely model here in front of me, and I'm a little bit at a loss about the scale. Maybe you can just briefly explain to me how far away we are from the barracks, how much distance we have across the reservoir, and what the distance is between the reservoir and the shoreline. and how far out these intake and outlet ports are. I would love to know more about that.
Okay, we'll get that information back to you in writing because I have a map that I can point to and say, put the calipers on and say, dividers on and say, this is the distance from there to here, this is the distance to here. I don't have those numbers with me, but we can do that. If you want to come over to the office, we'll take them right off the map, the 1 in 50,000 map, the military map, and we'll pull those distances off for you. I can give you rough numbers. You don't want rough numbers, so come on over and we'll pull those off. Rough numbers? Yeah, there's some numbers on that. You're right. Sorry. So there you go. Approximately 3 kilometers from reservoir should be to where, in the middle of the. Yeah. 3 kilometers. 650 feet from the surface.
The conversation can't be heard, guys. You got to turn on. Yeah.
So
The closest piece of equipment.
We'll get you some more numbers. You gotta keep in mind, this concept is not yet finalized. So in a rough order of magnitude, the depth of the powerhouse is about 600 feet, maybe 500 to 600 feet. Those tunnels that go from the powerhouse that's at the base of the reservoir out into the water, they actually climb. They come up in an angle, and they climb for roughly 3 kilometers. I don't have a fixed height of the reservoir yet because they still haven't locked the design down. I can say it's between 40 and 80 feet, but it's until we get into more detail, I'd be guessing.
When you provide the maps for Martin, can you actually plot the houses on as well and provide it to the group? Just so we can take reference to the closest house to what you're talking about?
Sure, we can do that. Absolutely.
Ginny, do you have more questions?
So we'll follow
A
up.
couple of quick questions. You had mentioned actually just in your article last week in the paper about you're committing 1.5 million annually for the life of the project. Is this for construction only? Are you talking 50 years or how many years are you right now is on the table?
So I don't think I mentioned community benefit agreement in the briefing, did I?
No, you did not, but you
So
wrote a
I'll
letter
take-
last week, so I'm sure
I'll
you know
take-
about it.
I'll take this as an opportunity to introduce a new topic with the chairman's blessing.
Certainly.
Community benefit agreement for Meaford is a real item. And inside the archives of the municipality, there is a document that's signed by us and signed by the previous administration municipality of items of interest with respect to a potential community benefit agreement. And that was small end negotiation. It wasn't a negotiation, it was put together. We sat for 2 meetings with the CAO and a couple of other people and said, to us, this makes sense, things you might be thinking about. And they said it does, but we've got a few things to add, and said, oh, what about this? And all that stuff is documented. It's inside the municipality, and that's a good starting point for the community benefit agreement. It essentially contains 3 things, categories. One is a annual cash reimbursement to the municipality, which at the moment is $1.5 million annually for the life of the project, indexed to inflation and whatever other bells and whistles go on it.
So is that like 50 years? Sorry, I'm trying to get years.
Years?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand years. So when you use the word project, what are you referencing like in years?
80?
Okay. No, that's good. No, thank you.
Forever.
Okay, no, I just don't know if you're saying
And
project is building or is project is life as operations is what I was trying to understand.
the moment, it's not planned to start.
Clark, for the folks at home, do you mind just going back to the microphone?
At the moment, it's not planned to start until the operation starts.
Okay.
Right? That's the starting point. And this is to acknowledge the fact that if we were building this on private land, there would be a commercial tax levied on us by the municipality, right? Yes, there would be, sizable one. And we did, we sort of rough order magnitude and came up with $1.5 million as a starting point. Okay, and fully expect a robust negotiation when you get to the point where it's time to do that. The other items are items of interest that I picked up from talking to the public, and some of the councilors picked up talking to the public, that are listed there, that are, I would call improvements, infrastructure improvements, recreation improvements. Heritage, yeah, thank you, Ross. Heritage, you're right, heritage improvements, but something to do with heritage. There's a lot of ideas in there. And I think, and the third thing is that we would like to be able to work some of our, like the transportation plan in the context of that agreement. It's the place to do it, not necessarily. Anyway, the process has to be decided. It's been idle for 2 years. I looked at the date. It was formalized in July 2 years ago, just before August break, and in advance of the last election. And all of that information is available publicly. And it's a good starting point for discussion.
Yes, it is. So Kirsten, can the committee see a copy of that? And if the answer is no and it's public, just tell us where it is and we can go to it.
Yes, send us the link.
If you,
I don't believe it is. I mean, I think.
it's definitely public. It's definitely public. So I would send it to you, but I don't think that's my role here. I think you'll get it off if you go to the meeting of the 25th or 7th of July, 2020. No, 2 years ago, 2021. You will find it attached to that CAO's agenda as a PDF file.
But if I could ask Kirsten if you could
It's
send that
there.
out to us.
That's where to go for it.
Yes.
Thanks, Mr. Sheriff, and thanks to you,
Clark,
you're good.
I don't talk to you very often. I think I've got a bad rep.
Well, I didn't know whether to say Clark or Mr. Little, so anyway.
Nice recovery.
Thanks for coming out this afternoon. I like the desktop. I hope you'll forgive me in saying 370 acres on a tabletop looks very small. But I was trying to count the little intakes and I ran out of fingers and toes, Clark. So I'm thinking there's 22, or has that actually
It's
been
bigger than 20, I
decided
think.
yet?
Yeah, larger than 20.
Oh, okay.
I think we say 21 or 22, but that's a concept at the moment. That provides the engineering that keeps the velocity to the current speed, the speed of the current, right? It could be, there's a lot of dimensional issues here. If the size of those things has decreased for some reason, then you got to put more in. It's not trivial. It's not a simple thing.
Okay.
The whole goal is the velocity of the water going in and out.
That's fine. Okay, I just like with the construction background, I guess that's what I'm primarily interested in this entire project. And I'll be quite honest with you, it's so huge. It's foggy to me. It's so huge. I just wanted to point out to people, I'm sure all of us are quite familiar with the Skydale project down at the end of Boucher Street. That entire property is about 5.5 acres. they, at their deepest, have dug something like 22, 24 feet in the ground. And I think everybody here knows the massive pile of debris on the corner of that lot down on Boucher Street. We're talking 370 acres, at least 90 feet.
It won't be 90, but roughly, it doesn't matter.
I
A lot, we're
thought
talking
I
about a whole
read
bunch.
30 meters deep someplace.
We're talking about a small ski hill.
Okay, I'm just throwing that out for comparison's sake. I'm not gonna ask what you're gonna do with it. I'm interested into, and I'm sure if TC hasn't had a chance to do these studies, they will in the relatively near future. They're gonna find out what they're actually digging into
Right.
there.
Yeah.
So, but it's gonna be a huge hole and a huge amount of material coming out. They'll have to do it like a strip mine, will they? Is that, or have we got that far
Well,
yet?
yes and no. There's really 4, maybe 5 big subcomponents to this thing. One is the underground mining to get the tunnels and the powerhouse in. That's one big project given to a sub who does mining. They've got to excavate the hole, the pond. Now, I do know that the concept is to use the material coming out of the excavation to reinforce and build the reservoir itself, the retaining wall, the dam, if you like, to use the material we pull out of the hole to use in the building of the dam. That is the plan. It still doesn't cover all the stuff we're going to dig out of the hole. So some of it has to go somewhere. And to the extent it can be used for the construction, other parts of the construction on the base brings up the whole issue of concrete. Between you and I, the gate posts, we're not all that excited about putting, 100 big Walker trucks or whoever makes it these days on the highway every day to bring concrete up to that site. So we're going to likely, one option is to put a temporary concrete mixing station up there on the top so we can make the concrete there. That gives us an opportunity then to use the spoil, the stuff that's coming out of the hole, maybe use it in the concrete as part of the mix. Don't know yet. But this is the sort of thing they're thinking about because they don't want to have to drag all these trucks up back and forth. Not only does it upset people on the roads, it's going to do, it's going to put a lot of diesel fumes into the atmosphere. And if we could limit that by using spoil from the stuff we dig up in the dam itself, then everybody wins on that. Those are the sorts of concepts that are being considered. I know in Asperger's Bay, which is the big sewage plant down in Toronto, where they just Hatch Engineering, who is on contract with us, just finished an outlet with a tunnel boring machine that goes out 3 kilometers into Lake Ontario below the bottom. And they have, 20 or 19 risers that come up to below the surface, but all it does is move treated water back into Lake Ontario. And I know that they were lucky. They found a guy on the north shore of Lake Ontario down 50 miles that wanted to build a new subdivision out into the lake, AKA what you see in Florida. These big divisions being driven into the lake bed. And he wanted all the spoil. He said, whatever you've got, I'll take. So they set up barges, they set up barge loading systems, tugboats, and they moved the stuff to another location on Lake Ontario where the guy needed the stuff. So there's all kinds of ideas. The question is, where do we land? And it's important that these types of discussions take place with you, members of this committee, and the public, so they understand what's happening. And that we really do mean that we're going to leave it whole when we're finished, meaning everything's going to be working as it did before, or maybe better because of the need to rebuild some stuff that we damage or we wear out. So
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you very much, Clark and Sarah, for being here with us today and for this first engagement with PSAC and TC Energy and for all the information that you're sharing with us. Just a couple of comments and then I have a question if I may. First of all, back to Ginny's point about community benefits, I just wanted to say publicly that one of the things I hope to see on that list is support for doctor recruitment, because like every community, we're pretty desperate for doctors to serve us. On page 13, there's a comment about site tours and suggests that tours of operating pump storage facilities and the project site have been offered to community members. If that's so, I believe I could speak for members of the committee in suggesting that we would all like to have those tours as well, and hopefully sooner rather than later, considering the time of year. So we'll look forward to you organizing those for us, Clark. And my question, coming back to page 10 and looking at the model, I don't see anything mentioned there about underwater transmission lines. And I just wanted to have confirmed that that is still the preferred method of moving the power from this project is through the underwater transmission lines.
So the first one was, I believe it's in there. I believe it's itemized, and I believe that the municipal staff made sure it was in there. Or else we did, based upon our understanding of the need for doctor recruitment. I think it's in there. But the whole concept here, from a top-down perspective, is we negotiate with you guys, municipality, sooner than later, what this thing looks like, and agree to it. And then it's locked in. And I see this committee being the interface between the residents of the community and the businesses to get their impressions and their opinions about this list and what they prefer. I mean, what do they think, where they want to see the money go? I think that's an important, that transparency aspect of it is an important function of this committee. And I think it'd be a fun thing to do, you know, to say, okay, let's take this on first, because all this technical stuff is going to take months to get to you. But the community benefit agreement can start tomorrow if you want, or next PSAC meeting. And we can go through the list and talk about it, and you guys can decide how you want to handle it. I think that's easier and is more material and will be more exciting to the public when they are asked, well, here's the survey, there's 10 things on it, list them in, or 5 things on it, list them in order of your preference. And out it goes, you get it back and you collate it, and now what do we do? You know, what do we do now? I think that's an important element of what's about to happen with community benefits. So I just throw that out there. Second one. Yeah, tours are on hold now. Bob, I said to you last meeting that we could probably get one done in August. It's not going to happen. They're on hold until we get clarity from Ontario. Fully intend to do that. I would ask the council and the clerk to figure out a way where we can get the 7 of you together in the same room talking about something, as opposed to have to run 2 separate tours to, say, a pump storage site because of this restriction of having more than 3 councillors in a room together. I do understand that there's an option called an education session that you can vote on and say, this is an education session, and you can have a dialogue like this, back and forth, questions, answers, questions answered. And there's no problem. You could do it here, or you could do it at the Range Diner if the clerk would allow it as an education session. It's much easier to take you, all of you, to either the site in New York or to Ludington and get the right people involved, including the Indigenous nations that are involved there, to walk you through that facility. So you see it and you understand the scale of it, what it does and how it works. We'd like to do that with all of you at once. But there's some restrictions with process inside the municipal act that restrict this, but something to work on. And we'd be glad to do it. We're not there yet. We'll be back into that business shortly after we get clarity from Ontario. The last one? Yeah, that's the current concept. I didn't mention it. I should have. So that little rectangle on the lower, that's the seventh line that comes up. That is a new facility. That's where there will be above ground transformers located. They will take the power from the powerhouse underground. They will change it into what it needs to be to go down the transmission line. It'll go underground and go out underwater. At some point out there, it'll come out from underground and go along the bottom to some land we have in Wasaga Beach West, and it'll transition there underground to the Stainer Power Station. Go ahead. I brought this. That's it conceptually. That's one option. So there are other options. Because of the stated ISO statement that they're now looking at transmission options that can handle all of this new power and long duration storage. So ISO has asked to figure that out. At some point, we have to plug in this facility to a hydro line, a big hydro line somewhere. And our feeling is that however we do that, it needs to be out of sight. As point of first departure. You might know it's running underground in a culvert, but you can't see it, can't hear it, so on. We do not want new transmission towers coming across the high ground out here, down a new route to Owen Sound or that's just not our preferred way of going for obvious reasons. I can tell you it was a very expensive option laying that cable underwater, getting it ready to lay underwater. We've surveyed all of that area. I may have told you, or some of you, that we discovered 2 shipwrecks out there that were previously not discovered by doing the sonar work on the bottom. A big wide swath, where does the cable go? And they now know what's on the bottom, so they can now get some more design work done. But there's other options that need to be articulated in the IPD. So our goal would be to have everything out of sight.
That's what we're here.
Yep.
We're running long. How's your stamina? You're all right?
I'm still upright and breathing, my friend. I'm fine.
All right. So you said earlier that we get a detailed map.
Yep.
When would we get that?
If I had it with me, I'd give it to you. I forgot to bring it. You can copy it yourself. It's available in the office. It's a military map, 1 in 50,000 scale, which is what the military likes to use. It's got all of the restricted areas on it, all of the domestic site, and we'll get a copy of that. There's a reference you can get. You can pull it off of the Canadian, whatever it's called these days. You can get the 1 in 50 off of it. You can get as many as you want. The good thing about this one, it's got the military annotation on it for restricted areas, for access points.
Yeah, because I think the committee would be interested because it impacts local residents where those impact zones are, and the exact location of where the reservoir, the upper reservoir would be. Obviously, there's concern of if the reservoir fails, what's the fail safe for the residents that live below it? And I'm hoping that a map like that would either provide some comfort or at least allow us to have.
That's to scale, and it's detailed off the 1 in 50,000. So the terrain you see there is the terrain you're going to see on the maps.
Yeah.
The whole issue of reservoir safety is a sort of a subset of this committee. I don't know, you're not allowed to have subcommittees, but it's something that we're going to need to come up with at some point in the future. We're going to have to bring our dam regulators. I don't mean as in dam pub, but the DAM regulators in here to talk to you about how they do their business when dams are built. So you can get a sense of the regulatory process that goes into the safety of dams during design, construction, and operation. It's already started. The basic designs we have played with have all been reviewed by these regulatory agencies that manage the building of new dams in Canada. All of that we've got to get that into the public eye.
Yeah, okay.
And I can't think of a better way to get it in than this committee. Again, we need to wait, all right? Because there has to be some engineering work agreed upon, at least fundamentally, what this thing's going to look like.
Okay. I read through the CANSIA report, and a lot of big numbers. And, you know, as you said, there's obviously some witchcraft in it, because I don't, I don't know
quote
how
me
to,
on that.
I don't
I
know how to
never
figure
said
it
that.
out.
I know people are
Yeah.
watching it, probably can't see us watching it. So
Well, then I'll tell them that I read the report and it looks like some witchcraft. But so when I see the 41,200 jobs,
Mhm.
what struck me as a little misleading, because it's a big number, you'd of course be impressed by it. But when you get granular and you read in the report, there's 17,000 direct jobs, and that's over the life of the project, which all of a sudden, when it's 80 years or infinitely, it could end up being a fairly small direct impact.
Sure.
But what I'm more concerned is how, when people hear it's making 41,200 jobs, how they respond to it, because that's an impressive number. And it strikes me as being a little misleading in it. And you're not,
I can't,
I know
I'm
you
not
don't
gonna-
need to answer for how the math is done.
What? You're reading my mind, which is always dangerous. The answer to this is bring the CANSIA analysts in here and talk to you, because they can answer your question. There's no way I can answer it.
Yeah.
I had the same reaction. And then I realized that was all of Ontario.
Yeah.
Now, as you get down into county, even those numbers are kind of, well, that's interesting. How's that going to work?
Mhm.
And does anybody in here track the gross domestic product of the municipality on an annual basis? Is that a statistic you work with in this municipality? It means nothing to me. A GDP of $256 million. What is that? So I think you need an analyst in here to answer your questions.
Okay. And
we can make that happen.
we will probably want that at some point, but we'll need everyone to read it and come ready. The financing of the project. So in the very beginning, you said that it's, Son, and you're going to be building, paying for it. Is the financing coming from TCE, or is it Ontario taxpayers that are spending $7 billion to build this?
That's one of the topics I don't have enough information to give you a good answer. I'm just not in that. My understanding is it's an equity partnership of a certain percentage, a majority owner, that would be us, and a minority owner, Son.
Yeah.
And then exactly how that equates to investment by each of those organizations. The intention is to have, I believe the intention is to have the investment to build this secured by both TransCanada Energy and Son.
Okay.
All right.
Because I think it's important, because if it's provincial money that's spent, however it's spent, then the benefit is mute, because the province, we paid for it.
Yeah.
So I think we need to be
But it's
very
wrapped,
clear.
yeah, it's wrapped up in the current negotiations that are ongoing.
Yeah.
So, and I don't have, if I had information,
Yeah.
I would tell you. I can't tell you now because it's commercially sensitive. I don't have information.
Yeah, I understand. Okay.
So at some point in the future, I know you hate me saying that, but this is early days. Some point in the future, that partnership arrangement will be delineated legally, and that arrangement will then be, open for discussion.
Okay.
Okay.
And you're right. We don't like hearing about it, that you don't know, because it feels for some residents that we've been talking about this project for a number of years, and we're still waiting on more information. We've struck this committee and we're waiting on more information. And
Yeah.
I think that's just the nature of the beast, unfortunately.
And it frustrates us also.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Could you list what the benefits are for Meaford, apart from $1.5 million and maybe a couple of long-term jobs? What are the benefits for the residents of this municipality?
In terms of this study,
Yeah, well, no, in terms of the project, I understand that there's Ontario-wide benefits, but is there something
can you
specific?
go to the next slide, please? That's a telling slide.
Yeah,
And to answer your question, you need the analysts who built that to come in and explain that to you, and you need to ask them what share of that dark area of Grey County is likely going to come to Meaford's, inside Meaford's boundaries. I don't know what they're going to say to you, but I do know that it's a reciprocal sort of arrangement. It's a transactional sort of thing. The municipalities that see value in this and are willing to sit down and talk about options on how they can help things work together are likely going to fare better than municipalities who shut it off. That's just the way the business works. But in terms of, we've always had trouble breaking down the aggregation of the first study was, it has been overtaken by events, meaning this study. This is current data. And I don't have a real good feel on what assumptions they made and what model they used to study, but they will know. And those are questions you should ask them. What assumptions did you make when you built this thing, when you analyzed it? And where did you get your data? Now, I think I know the answer to that, but I'm not the right person to tell you. It's good data.
okay, well, I think at some point, as we have time, I think we'll try to do something like that, because I can tell you that Cancia, when I just went on their website to figure out who they are, when there's a section called influence via specialized reports and they brag about the public money that it's helped secure, I say, that's an interesting resource. I'm not sure I buy what they say. And so I think it's probably right that we at some point challenge it. Yeah.
Talk to them.
Yeah. Okay.
I do want to talk, one thing I did miss, I'm sorry, I need to, if you allow me to just, because I'm 3 times I thought about mentioning it.
Yep,
it
please.
was on one of the slides, but I didn't talk about it. And that is our policy of hire and buy locally. That is a company-wide, 3 nations, Canada, America, and Mexico, policy that's just being now finalized and will be rolled out, certainly in time for this project. It was the brainchild of one of our senior people who used to work in a senior position in Chile in the mining business. And he lived right beside the site as this company was building this mine. And he was approached by maybe his landlady or the guy next door or his bread shop. And the guy said, "What's in it for me? The people who are building this are taking union labor from, other countries and dropping it in, and I don't see anything here. What's happening?" The gentleman who was approached with this in the remaining years he had with the company changed their policy so that they managed to have non-union mom and pop type businesses involved in supplying this mega project. He is leading the charge in TransCanada to bring the same policy, process, and concept into TransCanada. So it's meaningful. Now, Tony bailed. When I stood up to talk, he left. Tony's asked me, am I going to get some work in my machine shop? I said, we're going to have a robust hire and buy locally, and the priority goes to Meaford. So if it's here and it's available, there's possibility, there's hope. If it's not here, it's not going to be, okay? So as we start to get further into this and we understand what this policy means and how it's going to be executed, we'll be the first to come here and say, we need a session to talk to you about this. So it's a bold initiative, and it's being implemented.
Yeah, I don't think anyone here would say buying locally sounds like a bad idea. So that's sounds like a good one.
So I will tell you this, in our search for engineering project management companies. This is the top guy who has experience, global experience in building infrastructure of this scale. He's the one at the top. He builds it, and he has subcontractors down here. The first line I mentioned, maybe 5 of them, 4 of them. Mine it, dig the hole, build a reservoir, something else I can't remember right now, but anyway, some big things. When they reply, we're considering a couple of companies as EPCMs, when they are being asked to, when they put in their proposals to us, they must demonstrate that they have accepted and they're executing the local buy and hire policy. So what does that mean? At some point in this process, I won't say the phrase, you're going to likely have members of these EPCMs come into the community and say, we're looking around, what's here? What can we, we need to respond to this that's in the contracting documents. We have to demonstrate that we've beat the bushes as hard as we can. What do you got? Someone here needs to be ready for that. It's not coming next month or the month after, but it's a reality that's coming. And it's an opportunity for the Meaford, for a municipality to show well, or if you're not inclined, so don't show well. And then they will tell us where they believe they have to go. So that's coming in the next year. So.
Thank you. So we're at 7 o'clock. There was a bit of a warning that we might go a little long, but have the committee had their major questions, the ones that they can get answers for right now? But if you had a chance to ask your questions, I know, Howard, you had a, okay, good. Are you all right? Because you had, I thought, okay. So with that, I think, thank you, Clark.
You're welcome.
Oh, wait. Sorry.
I don't know if you can answer this right now, so don't worry if you can't. I was just wondering, throughout kind of the construction and also just the existence of this plant, how open necessarily will the base be to the community? Because currently and in the past, it's been slightly more involved than other bases. Like there's been hunting clubs that I know aren't running right now, but maybe can come back. There's been fishing opportunities. And I know personally for my family, sometimes we go and visit like grave sites that are there. How open will the base be once this is a plant? Or will it become more closed off because of the extra operations?
It's a good question. And one we are, can't find the one that we're conscious of, right? We do not yet have an arrangement with the Defense Department, and we won't have one until we can demonstrate to them that we have to do some things up there and do it properly. Access to the site, it's behind the fence, and we need to make sure that it's as publicly, the site is as publicly available as we can make it. Lots of negotiations with D&D. But there's a bigger issue here, which has not really got a lot to do with us, at least it does, but not directly. I'm aware, I'm a former military and I'm a member of the gym up there. And when COVID hit, they shut their doors and they haven't really opened them since. I know that there's an effort by the mayor and others on the council to try and get slowly get those doors reopened. And to the extent those efforts are working, they'll hopefully pan out in the future.
Thank you.
Sure.
For those, I still have I have a lot more questions. I want to ask them now, but is it possible to send them to Kirsten and get you to answer them, like just in writing, so that we've got, because I know we could spend hours. Are you able, if we sent them to Kirsten, to answer some so that we don't necessarily have to have you, but we can peruse them at our own disposal?
Yes, absolutely possible.
Sorry, Clark, if I could. So what I believe our next meeting will be, part of it will be reviewing the outcomes of that session at the last meeting. where we will have where there's lots of questions. And I think the committee will have an opportunity to create a parking lot for our questions that we will routinely send over to TCE or whomever it is we're asking the question of. And then we'll be able to address that.
Okay, they'll be able to address them back in writing, not necessarily have to present, but something that we could kind of work through quickly during our meetings type of thing.
I hope so. Yeah.
Okay.
Was I too laborious a speaker, or you don't want
No,
me
I
back?
just have so much,
Yeah.
there's just so much to cover. I know I didn't get half of mine, like, it's just so
Yeah,
much to
no,
cover.
you know, and the task ahead of you to get up to speed on this is a huge task. And we're committed to get as individuals or as a group up to speed as fast as you want to get up to speed. And if you want, I use the word coffee chat, if any of you want to come and talk about specific issues outside of the Thursday, let us know and we'll figure something out.
So for me, someone who's working, coffee chats don't work, but do you have an email that I could send you a list of questions that you could email them back?
The last slide has the email,
Okay, perfect.
that one right there. And that'll be sure that it goes into the project
Meaford bucket.
communications person.
Okay.
And then, so that we don't lose it. Send something to me, there's a 8% chance it'll get in there, but there's also a 2% chance that it slips through the cracks. So send it to that address. And then we get it logged and we administer it with process. Okay.
Okay.
And recognize they're going to be the same questions that you're going to ask during the impact assessment. Right?
Yeah.
So there's, we need to think that one through. Some of these questions can't be answered until the impact assessment.
Yeah.
But we love talking about concepts. We want ideas from you. If you got a better idea about traffic, I'd love to hear it. And how do we, it's from you folks who are coming up to speed that it's a very rich source of information for us. You don't have to agree with the project or not, but the traffic is going to be something we're going to have to negotiate, a traffic plan. So let's talk about it. Figure out, maybe one of you have an idea that we haven't thought about and we can use it. Absolutely. So let's keep talking. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, Clark. Certainly appreciate you coming in here and taking some of our questions. Yeah, we covered that, unfortunately, so we won't be able to. I'm happy to talk to you after the meeting, though. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So we moved on to committee inquiries, of which, are there any inquiries that we have? I don't. Adam.
Just a general inquiry about our schedule moving forward. We only meet once a month. Things come up pretty quickly. What is our plan moving forward for community engagement? We have a number of municipal events coming up in the fall that I think we should take advantage of, whether we have a presence there or something. But as of right now, we do not have any plans for community engagement. Us sitting in a room is great, but the other big half of our mandate is supposed to be community engagement. So whether that is, the craft show, the fall fair, I think it is important that before the end of the year, we have something that the community can come to us.
I think that's makes total sense to me. I guess it's up to us, though, to decide what we do for community engagement. So maybe as an agenda item for the next meeting, we should specify what are those public events, in the coming 6 months, list them out and see who can attend or who's automatically attending anyway, and just cover it that way. Lindy?
All right, I don't know if this is fully necessary, but just sort of adding to that, kind of restating my idea from the last meeting to potentially go into the school, because by the time our next meeting comes, I think of September 12th, the school year will have started. So this might be a good opportunity to talk to kids. They might not fully understand the issues, but still trying to see what they're thinking so we can move forward from there. Because it can also give us a good idea of what parents are thinking and get an idea just kind of overall what people want to know, what they need to know, those sorts of things.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the things that we as a committee need to, a part of our job is to gather the information, and part of it is sharing the information. And we don't actually have that much that's new. And that's because TCE doesn't have that much that's new. But certainly we need to engage with folks so that we're hearing what they're talking about. That's important for us. So do that. All right, the next thing on the agenda is communications. The committee was provided a correspondence list. I trust everyone read it. Were there is there discussion that we're supposed to have about? Any members want to talk about the correspondence that was sent to us? Recognizing it's 10 after 7. No? Okay. So the next meeting is September 12th. However, prior to that, August 28th, there is the agenda review meeting. Bob was good enough to join me in last month's. I'd like another member of the committee if they can join.
I just have a recommendation. Lindy, are you able to, like, if this is kind of your last summer one, so to speak, would this be easiest for you this month to attend versus one of the rest of us?
It's at 10:30 in the morning on a Tuesday. You might be busy come September. Or Wednesday.
I think it's hard to know. School hasn't started yet, but I guess I have enough notice.
I think what's Adam's suggesting is, are you available August 28th? And do you want to join me at the agenda meeting this time to set the agenda?
Sure. Yeah, August 28th. Yeah. So summer, so I'm good.
Awesome. Good idea. All right. With that, declare the meeting adjourned.